Thank you for the invitation. I'm really happy to be here. I love doing interdisciplinary projects like this. So let's jump right into it. I'm going to be focusing a little bit more on the policy aspect of how lawmakers, stakeholders react to the type of data that Dr. West has provided. And I'm going to be talking about how the law deals with this issue. So just some quick facts. Groundwater, 97% of all fresh water comes from the ground. It's clear, whether you look at nationally or internationally, the demands of fresh water outpace supply significantly. And the scenario is even worse in the state of Texas, given the population projections over the coming decades. I think most of the people in the room are familiar with the overall aquifer, but here it is. 8 states, more than 174,000 square miles. It is an essential resource for the region and the nation. So in Texas, 60% of our fresh water comes from the ground. 80% is used for irrigation. I've seen different numbers, but this is I feel comfortable using these here. So let's talk about private property, right? So I teach private property, I teach property law, and we look at scenarios where we determine who owns what, right? And we apply this for good reasons, right? We create property with well-defined rules so that it's clear who owns what, right? There's no bloodshed over disputes regarding whose computer that is, whose car that is, whose home that is. Property rights are also supposed to be permanent, right? It's not going to change that we have a different conception of property absent some massive political revolution or uprising. And so property rights are well-defined, they're permanent, and that also makes it so that they're predictable, right? We can value things because we know that the rules for who owns something are not going to change drastically, right? So we can project in the future with some reasonable certainty what things are going to look like. And this leads to accurate or more accurate pricing pursuant to microeconomic theory, laws of supply and demand. So this is generally speaking why private property works, why we like it, right? It allows us to do these things in a well-ordered society that leads a nice predictive pricing. Now, when we start to apply these principles and property to water, it may be a little bit less of a happy marriage. So the law treats surface water and groundwater very differently, right? So the water rights in a river or stream or lake are very different than the rights that individuals, landowners have to the ground, to the water underneath their property. So one of these, the most prominent way of conceptualizing property of water in the West is prior appropriation. First in time, if you're the first person to use it, then you've developed the property right to continue using that in the future. The rule of capture in Texas is the rule that's applied to groundwater. If you pump it, it's yours. If you don't pump it, then you can lose it. It's okay for someone else to extract that groundwater from underneath your property. There's no liability that may exist there. There are other variants of property rights in both in groundwater related to correlative rights and reasonable use. Those just mean that you have to sort of get along with your neighbors in making sure that your property use is consistent with their property use, right? So there can be some actions there as against neighbors, right? But the point here, right, is that regardless of what legal theory we're using to define a property right, whether it's prior appropriation, rule of capture, or anything else, that's a property right. Just like the ownership rights that you have in your car, your home, you have the right either to the ownership of that water or the right to use that water, right? And those are intended to be permanent and certain, right? So this doesn't work real well because water is variable, as we know in West Texas, right? Some days, some years we get good rain, other years we don't. That makes it very difficult to price accurately, right? Because we can't predict what the supply is going to be, but we know that demand is going to be in response to that supply, right? So what we have are price signals that often come too late in order to correct for a drought, say, right? Californians are well aware of this idea currently, as we were in 2012. So what does this have to do with climate change? So climate change, decreasing soil moisture, increased drought, this is I'm not a scientist, right? I'm a lawyer, so I read things that are scientific, right? And I attempt to understand them. But what I can gather from climate change is that this is all going to be messed up, right? And the things that we have been doing are not going to be the things that we're going to do in the future, right? So this is the scariest thing I've seen, right? This is the map that NASA has produced. The one on the left is 2095 if we make significant changes to carbon emissions. The one on the right is if we do not and we continue at the current pace. My apologies to any scientists in the room that know better. That's my layperson's understanding of this. The map on the right indicates that nothing will grow in Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, most of the Midwest, right? So that's the circumstance, right? So if we have significant changes, right, how do we react to them? Well, property law is based on this idea that it doesn't change, right? We rely on that fact, that you won't wake up one morning and the law will suddenly be you don't get to own your home, right? That would cause massive social unrest. Well, that's what we're talking about, right? Farmers, everybody here has an expectation interest that the water is going to continue to be there, but that's not necessarily what's going to happen. And so property rights create this reliance interest, they create expectations, entire economies are built on this idea, right? And it also is a form of an entitlement, right? I think we don't think about entitlements in this way, right? But we feel entitled to this surplus of water, to the existence of water, and that may not be the case always. So this is why this concept of property and water is very problematic, right? The thing that I like the most about this is this concept from Professor Carol Rhodes, who's a law professor at Arizona and Yale. She says we should turn to history along with self-reflection to understand the stories that we once used to tell ourselves about property, as well as the ones we are telling ourselves now. My point here in this is I don't think that we can continue on the way that we're continuing. Right? This is Dr. West's exact point. We have to be more thoughtful about planning, right? And this is the idea that we have expected property law to continue to have been this way and to continue on this way. And that's just not the case, right? And so transitioning away from that concept of property rights and water is a very, very uncomfortable and hard and difficult thing to do. But it's the transition that we have to make. The soft landing idea is exactly the right one. The problem with this is that whether you're in any state, right, it doesn't matter whether you're in Texas or Massachusetts or California, and you have a right to surface water or groundwater pursuant to whatever legal regime is there. Exactly. If the government tells you you cannot have that right, you no longer can extract that water, then they owe you for it. They have to pay you for it, right? So the choice is, are we going to crash land when the drought comes, or are we going to transition towards a sustainable economy and water use using whatever tools we have available to us, whether it's government or other incentives to transition to water sustainable practices. So that's my talk. That's the big picture. Happy to answer questions.